It was late. Too late, really. I'd been driving for hours, barely staying awake on the back roads of nowhere. My GPS had long stopped working, and the only thing guiding me was the faint outline of distant, flickering streetlights. I thought I could make it to my destination without stopping. But as the night crept on, I realized I was wrong. My eyes burned, and my body screamed for rest. Then I saw it. A lone, unassuming motel sign that read, "Hilltop Motel Vacancy." I didn't even think twice. The thought of a bed, a warm room, maybe a coffee, was enough to push me into the parking lot. The place seemed deserted, which only made me hesitate for a second. But I was tired. I needed a break. The motel had that classic, outdated look. The kind that felt like it belonged in the 70s, with its neon lights buzzing weakly and peeling paint. As I stepped out of my car, the cold air hit me like a slap, waking me up a little. The sound of gravel crunching under my boots echoed through the empty lot. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit, with an old, cracked counter that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I rang the bell. A few seconds later, the door behind the counter creaked open, and a man appeared. "Hello there," he said with a friendly yet unsettling smile. His name tag said Harold. He was older, probably in his late 50s, with a thin, graying beard. His eyes were too wide, too bright. "Room for the night?" I asked, trying to mask the unease that was creeping up my spine. "Of course," he said, almost too eagerly. He handed me a key, the brass tag worn and scratched. "Room 7, just down the hall." I took the key without much thought. Something about Harold's smile, the way he was staring at me, made my stomach twist. I forced myself to shake it off. I wasn't here for thrills. I was here to rest. The hallway was narrow, the walls covered in faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges. I passed a few doors that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. When I reached room 7, the door was ajar. I pushed it open. The room was basic, small, dim, with a single bed, a nightstand, and a lamp that flickered. The air inside was thick, stale. I tossed my bag on the bed, peeled off my jacket, and headed for the bathroom. As I passed the window, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A figure standing near the edge of the parking lot, just beyond the reach of the lights. I froze, but when I turned to look, they were gone. My heart was pounding in my chest. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone else had checked in. I shut the bathroom door behind me, locking it just to be safe. But something felt wrong. Something wasn't right about this place. And that's when I heard the first knock. At first, I thought it was the wind. The building creaked in the cold, and I'd read enough ghost stories to know that a knock could just be the sound of an old building settling. But the knock came again. Slow, methodical. 3 sharp raps on the door, followed by silence. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced at the bathroom door, feeling a cold sweat starting to form on my skin. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't told anyone where I was, let alone anyone here. "Hello," I called out cautiously, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Nothing. I slowly opened the bathroom door, careful not to make a sound. My eyes were fixed on the door to the room, watching for any movement. The seconds dragged on like hours. I told myself it was nothing, just some prankster, maybe a guest from one of the other rooms. But then the knock came again. This time, it was louder, as if someone was pounding on the door, desperate to get in. My pulse hammered in my ears. I walked slowly toward the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. I hesitated for a moment, then turned the knob. The door swung open. There was no one there. I stood there, my breath catching in my throat, staring into the empty hallway. The dim light from the lobby flickered, casting long shadows. I stepped back into the room, the feeling of being watched creeping over me like ice water running down my spine. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, a voice. It seemed to come from right behind me. "Don't go back to sleep." I whipped around, but no one was there. The room was empty, silent. My stomach churned. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as though it was closing in on me. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, fingers fumbling, and dialed the front desk. "Hello?" Harold's voice answered after one ring. Yeah," I stammered. "I just had a strange experience. Someone knocked on my door. And there's this feeling, I don't know how to explain it. Something's wrong here." Harold was silent for a moment, and then his voice lowered, almost as if he were speaking from a different place altogether. "Nothing wrong here, son. This place is perfectly safe. You're just tired. Get some rest." There was something off about his tone. Too calm, too rehearsed. I didn't reply. I just hung up, my hand shaking. The last thing I needed was to get involved in some weird local drama. I wasn't in the mood for any of this, especially when I was so close to passing out. I locked the door again and lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to shake the feeling of dread crawling over me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape it. I was being watched. I was being hunted. I knew it. Suddenly, the phone rang again. The shrill tone cut through the silence like a knife. I reached for it, hesitating only for a second. "Hello?" My voice was shaky. There was no answer, only breathing. Slow, deep breaths, as if something, was on the other end, waiting for me to speak. The hairs on my neck stood on end. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice cracking. The breathing continued, then it stopped. And then came a whisper, low and raspy. "Look out the window." I didn't want to, but some force, some sick curiosity, pulled me toward the curtain. I pulled it back slowly, and there, standing in the parking lot just beyond the dim light, was the figure I had seen earlier. The same figure, and this time it was looking directly at me. Couldn't breathe. My eyes locked on the figure outside, my heart racing, pounding in my chest like a drum. It stood motionless, just beyond the glow of the parking lot light, its features hidden in the shadows. But it was different this time. It wasn't just standing there. It was waiting, like it knew I was watching. I pulled the curtain shut with a violent jerk, my hands trembling uncontrollably. My mind was spiraling, desperate for an explanation. Any explanation that didn't involve some kind of lunatic stalking me outside my motel room. But my rational thoughts betrayed me. I knew deep down that this was real. Whatever was out there wasn't just some trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. I backed away from the window, nearly tripping over the bed as I scrambled for my phone. I called the front desk again, my finger almost slipping off the screen. "Harold," I said, my voice strained. "There's someone out there. I saw them, standing in the parking lot, just staring at my window." There was a long pause, too long, and when Harold spoke again, his voice was different, almost cold. "Don't look at them again. It won't do you any good. Just stay inside your room, lock the door, and wait until morning." Wait until morning. My brain refused to process the words. I wanted to argue, to demand some kind of explanation, but before I could speak, Harold's voice interrupted again. "You're safe as long as you follow the rules. Don't open the door for anyone. Don't leave the room. And don't look outside." The line went dead. I stared at the screen for a moment, numb. What rules? What the hell was going on here? I felt trapped. I'd come here for a simple night of rest, and now I was locked inside, helpless with something or someone, lurking just outside. Every noise in the motel sounded amplified. The sound of my own breath felt suffocating, like it was too loud, like I couldn't escape the feeling of eyes watching me. Then, another knock. This one was softer, almost a tap, but it was deliberate, rhythmic, like a countdown. I froze. My eyes darted between the door and the window. I couldn't bring myself to move. I wasn't sure if it was Harold outside now, or if the figure had somehow found its way closer. Or worse, if there were more of them. I slid to the floor, pulling my knees up to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. My mind raced. I had to leave. I couldn't stay here, but something kept me rooted to that spot. Fear, or some unseen force, as though my body knew better than my brain that I wasn't going anywhere tonight. The knock came again, and this time it wasn't just a tap. It was a fist pounding against the door, demanding entry. I didn't dare answer. Suddenly, there was a sound from the hallway, something shuffling, scraping against the floor. Then, a voice, low, guttural, mumbling something I couldn't quite understand. I crawled on all fours to the door, heart hammering in my chest, and I pressed my ear against it. The voice was getting closer. "Let me in, let me in." It was not Harold. I didn't know what was worse, the sound of the voice or the fact that I could now hear breathing. Heavy, labored breaths, coming from right outside. I jumped back, my hand covering my mouth to stifle the scream that was building up in my throat. But I was too late. The door rattled violently, and then, just as quickly, it stopped. Dead silence. The kind of silence that suffocates you. The kind of silence that means something is wrong. I had to leave. I had to escape this madness. But how? The thought of going out the back door, through the window, seemed like the only option left. But the hallway was so quiet now. Too quiet. What if I was walking right into it? What if it had been waiting for me the whole time? And that was when I heard it. The creak of the floorboards outside. I wasn't alone anymore. My breath came in shallow gasps as I crouched in the corner of the room, trying to make myself as invisible as possible. My entire body felt like it was vibrating with fear, and my mind couldn't focus on anything but the sounds creeping closer from outside. The floorboards creaked again, closer this time. I didn't dare move. I felt like any sudden motion, any sound I made would draw attention, would bring whatever was out there straight to me. I pressed my back against the cold wall, my eyes glued to the door, waiting, praying for the noise to stop. But it didn't. The shuffling continued. The slow, methodical steps dragging like something wounded, something broken. I heard a faint scraping noise, something metal dragging across the floor, or perhaps nails running down the wall. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. Then the voice again, soft, barely audible. "Come out! Come out!" I clamped my hand over my mouth, choking back a sob. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was paralyzed with fear, as if something unseen was holding me in place. I couldn't even move my limbs. They felt as though they were weighed down by an invisible force. "Please, God, make it stop." Suddenly, the phone rang again. I jumped at the sound, the shock of it making my heart race even faster. But I didn't want to pick it up. I didn't want to hear Harold's voice again, or worse, something else pretending to be him. But the ringing wouldn't stop. Felt like it was pulling me in, calling me to answer. Finally, trembling, I grabbed the phone. "Hello?" My voice barely rose above a whisper. The line was silent for a long time, and then, finally, came a voice. But it wasn't Harold. It was different. It was distorted, as if someone or something was trying to imitate him. The voice was deep, rasping, and so familiar that it made my stomach turn. "Don't hang up. It's already too late. You should have left when you had the chance. The motel doesn't let go of its guests. Not without a price." My blood ran cold. I felt dizzy, like I was going to pass out, but I forced myself to stay alert. I had to stay sane. "Who is this? What do you want?" My words came out as a desperate plea. The voice on the other end chuckled, but it wasn't a normal laugh. It was hollow, empty, like it was coming from somewhere deep underground. "You're still here, aren't you? You didn't leave. You didn't listen. And now, well, now you're part of it. Just like all the others." My heart skipped a beat. My throat closed up. What was it talking about? All the others? Who's there? I demanded, my voice cracking. "What's happening? What do you want from me?" The voice took on a darker, more menacing tone. "It's not about what we want. It's about what you want. Do you want to leave? Or do you want to stay with us?" I couldn't understand. My head spun, trying to process the words, trying to make sense of the madness. But I couldn't. It was as if the walls were closing in on me, and every second I stayed in that room, the air grew thicker, heavier. The knocking had stopped, but now I could feel the pressure, like the room itself was watching me. I hung up, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was what happened next. I heard it, the sound of the door handle turning. The figure, it was trying to get in. But this time it wasn't just one. I heard the scraping, More than one. More than two. There were many. They were outside, gathering. I pressed myself against the far wall, hoping against hope that they wouldn't notice me, that somehow I could slip away. But there was no escape. And then the door burst open. The door flew open with a violent force that made the walls tremble. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, everything felt like it was in slow motion. The shadows from the hallway poured into the room, creeping along the floor like a living thing. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. There, standing in the doorway, was the figure, the same one I had seen outside. But now it wasn't alone. A dozen other shapes stood behind it, their forms hidden in the darkness. Some were tall, others unnaturally thin, their arms stretched out far longer than humanly possible. They moved without a sound, their faces, if you could call them faces, twisted, grotesque. Hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me, as if they could see the deepest corners of my soul. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I could only watch in horror as they shuffled forward, inching closer, their twisted, unnatural limbs dragging across the floor, leaving behind a trail of cold air. The first figure, the one from the window, stepped into the room, its head tilting at an impossible angle as it stared down at me with empty, black eyes. I could feel its gaze like a weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. I wanted to run. I needed to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. It was like the air had turned to concrete, holding me in place. My mind screamed for me to do something, anything, but my body refused to obey. Then, a voice. It wasn't the same voice from the phone. It was deeper. It was a guttural, rasping whisper, like 1,000 voices layered together. You should have listened. I wanted to cry out, to beg for mercy, but no words came. I was paralyzed, my body too terrified to move, too terrified to even breathe. The figures moved closer, closing in on me like a wave, the air growing colder with each passing second. I could hear them whispering to each other in a language I couldn't understand, their voices overlapping in a chorus of madness. It was as if they were communicating, planning something. One of them, taller than the rest, reached out a hand, its fingers long and thin, its nails sharp like claws. I didn't know whether it was trying to touch me or rip me apart, but I felt its presence more than I saw it. Its cold fingers brushed against my cheek, sending a shock of ice through my body. My whole body trembled, unable to fight against the terror that flooded every inch of me. Then suddenly, everything stopped. The figures froze in place, all of them staring at me with those cold, empty eyes. It was like they were waiting for something. I didn't understand. What were they waiting for? That's when I heard a sound. Faint at first, but growing louder by the second. A thumping noise, rapid and uneven, like someone or something was running down the hall. And then the door slammed shut with such force it rattled the entire room. The figures froze for a moment, and then they slowly began to withdraw, retreating into the darkness from where they had come. Their movements were slow, deliberate, like they were being pulled back into the shadows. One by one, they disappeared into the hallway, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. My heart raced. My breath came in ragged gasps as I collapsed to the floor, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. I didn't understand what had just happened. Were they gone? Had they left me alone? The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway now, loud and clear. Someone was approaching. But who? My mind was spinning, my thoughts racing. I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to leave. I had to escape. But before I could move, I heard the last thing I wanted to hear. The unmistakable click of a door handle turning. The door handle turned slowly, almost deliberately, as though the thing on the other side knew exactly what it was doing. I was frozen, every muscle in my body screaming for me to get up, to run, but I couldn't. My mind was a whirlwind of panic, and I was trapped in the nightmare I'd tried so desperately to escape. I watched in horror as the door creaked open, just a few inches. The faint light from the hallway spilled into the room, casting eerie shadows across the walls. But there was no one there, just silence. And then, the whisper, "Come." The voice was no longer distorted, no longer a jumble of twisted breaths. It was clear, It was calm, and it was unmistakably inviting. I couldn't understand it. What was it? What did it want from me? Why wasn't it attacking me like it had before? Why had it stopped? But as the whisper grew louder, more insistent, I knew that this wasn't a chance for mercy. This was their game. This was their way of drawing me in, pulling me closer, until I had no choice but to follow them. And then I heard it, the sound of a door shutting. Not the motel door, the other door, the one behind me. I whirled around, my pulse racing, and saw what I feared most. The exit door was closed. Locked. No. The only way out was through the hallway, through whatever was waiting for me. My mind screamed for me to wake up, to break free from the grip of whatever nightmare I was trapped in. But I knew it wasn't just a dream. This was real. Too real. I crept toward the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle. I wanted to get out. I needed to get out. But the whispering, those low, hollow voices, kept calling me back. I closed my eyes for a moment, gripping the handle so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then, with one final breath, I flung the door open. The hallway stretched out before me, dark and endless. There was no one there, just shadows. But I could feel them. I could feel their eyes on me, watching me from the darkness, waiting. The figures, the whispers, the feeling of suffocating dread. Everything was alive, pressing in on me from all sides. I had to move. I couldn't stay there, trapped in that haunted place. But as I took my first step into the hallway, I felt a cold hand grab my wrist. It wasn't like before. It wasn't cold like ice, but it was different. The touch was heavy, as though it had weight, like something far older and darker than anything I could understand. I spun around, and there it was, Harold. But he wasn't the same. His face was twisted, like something had taken over his body, pulling his features into something monstrous. His eyes were black, empty voids, and his mouth was stretched into a grin that didn't belong to a human. "You should have listened," he said, his voice now completely alien, like the very words were being forced out of him. And then he stepped aside, revealing what stood behind him. The figures, all of them, dozens of them, lined up in the hallway, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark. They didn't move, not yet, but I could feel it. Feel them waiting, like predators closing in on their prey. "You had a choice," Harold continued, his voice hollow and distant. "But now you belong to us." I backed away, my mind racing, but there was nowhere to go, no way to escape. The hallway stretched on forever, and the figures, those things, were closing in on me, their footsteps silent and slow, but inexorable. I was cornered. My heart pounded in my chest. My legs were shaking. And then, I realized something. The motel, the entire place, was a trap. It wasn't about the rooms or the empty parking lot or the strange knockings. It was a place where they kept their victims. They kept you here. They watched you. They made you part of them. And now it was my turn. I wasn't just in a motel anymore. I was part of it. I had become one of them. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was the cold, dead eyes of the figure who had been waiting outside my window. I had no choice. As the figures moved closer, the air around me grew thick with an unnatural cold, pressing against my chest, suffocating me with every breath I took. The hallway, once just a passageway, now felt like the inside of a tomb, a place where nothing left could ever escape. The shadows around me shifted, and I could feel the eyes of the things in the dark drilling into me, their unseen gaze burrowing deep into my soul. They weren't just watching me. They were feeling me, reading my every fear, every thought, until there was nothing left of me but an empty shell. "Please, just let me go," I whispered, but the words felt so small, so powerless. I felt like a fool, pleading for mercy from things that didn't understand the meaning of the word. The motel, the place, it wasn't about mercy, it was about taking, consuming. It was a cycle that never ended. One of the figures moved closer, taller than the rest, its limbs stretching unnaturally as it reached out a bony hand, its nails sharp and elongated. I flinched, expecting the worst, But then I heard a voice. Not Harold's voice, not the voice of the figures, but something else, something familiar. "You're not alone." I turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was a silhouette. It was a person, but the shadows around them warped the figure. I knew that voice. I knew that face. It was me, the figure, myself. Stepped forward, and in an instant, the room shifted. The walls twisted, the shadows contorted, and the space seemed to collapse inward. "You've always been here," the figure said, its voice eerily calm. "It's all you've ever known." I took a step back, horrified. What are you talking about? "You chose this place. You always have. This motel doesn't bring people, captures them. It's a reflection of what you are, what you've always been." The figure raised its hand, and in an instant, everything became clear. The rooms, the knocks, the eerie whispers. They weren't just a series of events. They were a manifestation of my own darkest impulses, my deepest fears. I had been running from myself, from something inside of me that I couldn't face. And now it had caught up to me. The figure's face. My face was grinning now, the smile stretching unnaturally wide, as if it were mocking my every attempt to escape. "This is where it ends," it whispered. "You've been part of this cycle all along. And now, you'll never leave." I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight, to run, but my body refused to move. I felt the walls closing in, the air pressing against me, until everything turned to black. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the room. The same motel, the same walls, the same endless hallway, and the same empty gaze of the figures watching from the dark. I understood now. There was no escaping. Not this time. Not ever. The door clicked shut behind me, and I was trapped. Trapped within the very cycle I had been running from.